Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, welcome everybody. It's been a little while, so glad to have a bunch of you guys back. Hopefully you guys all joined us for our phenomenal webinar last month, October. Can't believe it's already November. And Thanksgiving holiday right around the corner for many of us. But welcome back. We are working on our second in our series on proactive post-adoption strategy and support. And today we are focusing on those dog-to-dog introductions. So we're gonna be talking about that. So on our agenda today, we are going to look at building blocks, how we start to set up a foundation prior to that introduction, right? Things we need to consider and take into account. I know years ago, I used to coach a lot on how simple introductions can be. I will tell you this webinar is focused more on time and taking time to make these introductions even more conducive long-term for those relationships in the home. So while we can have short ones, we also have long ones. So we'll talk about those introductions as well as how to build those building blocks. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about backup plans when our introductions don't go the way we want, and how to make sure they do. So building blocks, right? What do we need to do to help get ourselves set up for an introduction? While some of our new dogs to our home are thought about and we've planned ahead, I know many times they're coming home because something pulled on our heartstrings, right? And here we are now with a dog on our way home and we're thinking, oh my, how are we going to do this, right? What is my other dog going to think of this, or dogs in the home, right? So as we're contemplating this, we want to think about what we can put together, what it's going to look like, that foundation, so we can help the introduction go as smoothly as possible. So just like we were setting a foundation with cement, we want to think about the forms we need to put in place, getting ourselves prepared essentially for that layout. We want to talk about how we're going to do the pouring that cement, making sure everything goes smoothly. And then we need to look at making sure our environment is set up for curing our cement, right? Making sure we have the proper moisture, humidity, all of that is in place, which really comes down to other parts when we talk about dogs. So when we look at setting up a layout, right, putting those forms in place, thinking about how we're going to prepare that introduction, you'll hear me say this multiple times throughout this webinar today, but we really, really want to take things slow. Yes, have many of us, probably myself included, done those quick 20, 30-minute intros and away we go, right? There's more and more conversation around doing longer introductions. A lot of what we'll talk about today helps you plan for those and why we want to do them. But I really want to encourage everybody to try to take things slower, to give our new dog, whether it's an 8-week-old puppy or a 2-year-old rescue, time to decompress, to just adjust to the routine, to the home, to the environment before we start throwing new introductions at them, right? Really want to, anything that we can lower their stress level with is going to be our goal. In fact, many circles, the school of thought now is that ideally we want to wait about 2 weeks before we're doing introductions. Now, 2 weeks is a long time, and I'm not saying everybody needs that, but I do think we need to experience a reasonable amount of time. We have to, of course, take into consideration the individual dog, the environment they're going to, the family, all of that's important. And the environmental considerations are going to help us with as far as setting up management correctly, right? So if we are going to give our dogs time to decompress, not do intros, then we have to have a way to keep our dogs separated, right? So we need to think about that before we're walking in the door. And we need to have some realistic expectations here. What can we do? How can we set up our house? What is fair to our current dog? What is fair to our new dog? Maybe this is going to be a couple days. Maybe we do need those 2 weeks, right? Go into it open-minded and think about how long it takes you to calm down and adjust and kind of be yourself, and take that into consideration when we're thinking about this. And of course, we want to look at the dog's history. We may not have a good history. We may not know where they came from. But if we do, if we know they were from a family if they've lived in a home, if they've not lived in a home. We certainly should know the history of our resident dog with us, right? What has our resident dog's experience been with other dogs? How are they socially? Have they had any negative altercations or instances with dogs? These are things that are going to help us as we continue to work through the building blocks of our plan, right? Because we're getting ready to prepare the pour, right? To have this intro. How are we going to do this? How's it going to come out successfully? And knowing some of that information is going to help us, because then we can think about, are we going to need more than one person helping with this? Do I need to call my next door neighbor to come over and grab my resident dog? Do I need to call a family member? Do I have someone in the home who can help me? Or am I going to have to rethink this because I need to do it by myself? Where am I going to introduce my dogs? I would imagine everybody on this phone call is aware that neutral locations are ideal. Do we have a neutral location? Is the front yard neutral? Is the backyard neutral? And by neutral, I mean your current resident dog. It would be a new place for them too, not a place they're familiar with. So we need to consider that. What about resources? And this is a hard one, because regardless of how we ultimately do our introduction, we need to think about resources in the area and even after that as well. And these resources could be toys in the area. They could be water. Are these good things, or could these hinder our introduction? What about distractions? Could they help or could they hinder? All of that needs to be thought about when we think about location and where we're going to do this. And then, of course, if we're preparing, we want to mentally prepare ourselves a little bit and just keep that cool mindset, right? We've done it. We've got the dog. Take a breath. We're going to make sure everything goes according to plan as best we can, right? And the other part of our building blocks is that curing, right? So with concrete, we're talking about providing that adequate moisture content, temperature, and time. And so for us, it's about time. And we also, in order to be able to provide the supportive environment that our dogs need for those building blocks, we need to be able to read body language. So we need to take some time to get familiar with signaling, so we know what communication we can let go and let our dogs figure it out, and what communication might be an indicator to us we should watch a little closely, as we might want to intervene here in just a minute or sooner than a minute, right? So just a couple quick examples here. There's a ton of different body language signals that we would want to look at, but I want to encourage you guys to familiarize yourself with the subtle ones you might not think about, like lip licks. They can be fast. We miss them. Front paw raises. A lot of people don't catch those. Tails down, not stiff, not high over the back, not wagging, just hanging there can actually be an indication. And even body language of my dog's not interacting, kind of just ignoring the other dog. That's pretty indicative of where they're at. So we want to think about that. Thankfully, we have some terrific webinars on body language available to you guys. You can access those, and those would be very helpful for any introductions you're planning as far as being able to identify signals. Now, once we've kind of put our foundation in place, we've thought about all these things. We're starting to put together that plan, right? We're ready. We're getting set. We're going to take off. We're going to do a scenario, an introduction scenario, and we're going to talk about some of those, and then we're going to talk about some creative ways as well. So if we're ready to take off, we need to think about our spatial setup. Maybe we have selected the location, but is it big enough? Is it wide enough? Space is a huge, huge part of making sure an introduction goes successfully. The more space you have, the less pressure my dogs feel, and the more they can get away if they do feel pressure. And I'm not talking about a negative interaction as much as just interacting, right? Not feeling obligated, not feeling so stuck with a dog. So take that into consideration when you're thinking about the location. The size of your dogs may influence this. If you have 2 large dogs versus 2 little dogs, you may need a bigger space. And also, if you happen to know that either dog might not be as comfortable if we would like with dogs, then we might want a bigger space as well. So make sure when we're there and we're ready and we're starting, that we're looking around us and thinking, this is good. This was a good selection. We're ready to go. Equipment, tools. What do we need on us? What do we have? Do we have leashes on our dogs? Do we have harnesses on our dogs? Do we need a gentle leader? All of our scenarios, for the most part, involve leashes. Some entirely until the end. Some not so much. We have some off leash. Look at some off leash too. But what other equipment might we need, or tools in that area? Do I need any distractors? Do I need to consider a muzzle, depending on the dogs? Again, you've got to, this is where that foundation comes in, thinking about the history. What are we going to need to have? Want to make sure we are doing this one dog at a time. This is for those multi-dog homes, right? If we have multiple dogs in a home, we introduce them to one dog first. We start that, get them comfortable, and then we can add an introduction to a second dog individually. And once they're comfortable with that individual dog, then we can put the two dogs together, right? And then we can bring them into the home. So it's going to be a bit of a process. We also want to make sure that the dogs we're introducing, we've given them an opportunity to expend their energy, to get it out, right? We don't need them taking that energy out in the communication they express on the other dog. That could be quickly misinterpreted, which is not what we want. And I really can't say enough that, as hard as it is sometimes, we do want to give our dogs the chance to communicate. And when I say hard as it is, I think we all try to be very cautious about decreasing risk and watching body language and intervening. And sometimes I think we can overdo it, right? It's okay for my dog to raise their lip and say, back off, assuming my other dog responds. It's okay for them to whine. It's okay for them to be excited. We just don't want to see it continuing to escalate down a path we don't want. What we do want is to give our dogs the opportunity to learn that style of communication between each other. I highly recommend our first introductions are very short, and it's better to do shorter, multiple introductions before we bring our dogs together, so we know everything is set up. And then again, this comes back to that less is more, really kind of trying to stand back, give our dogs some space to do it. We've set it up correctly. They should be able to communicate well, and try not to push, right? If they're off at other sides of the yard, not talking to each other, that's an indication we need more time. Take more time. I think all of us want that. We're excited. We want the rest of our family to be excited, our other dogs to be excited, and that's not always exactly how it plays out. So take your time, give both your dogs time, the two dogs being introduced that day, and things will go much better. That's when we're ready. These are all the things we're on a go now. So now let's talk about the actual introduction scenarios. There are 4 that I've titled for us to look at. Realistically, again, every dog's an individual. Every family is going to be different. Every environment will be unique where people live. So more often than not, what I find is that you end up doing a combination or tweaking or customizing these to what will fit best for you. So don't hesitate to do that. We'll start with talking about the parallel walking, which most people are familiar with. This has kind of been that go-to way to introduce dogs for years. And it can be something that has taken 20, 30 minutes, and away we go. I find now that I encourage people to take more time to do multiple walks rather than just kind of one and done. One, I want that decompression, but 2, I think more often than not, we miss signals. We think our dogs are fine and kind of, again, push them forward a little faster. Here's that less is more, right, than what we want. But when we do parallel walking, I like to start with people offset. So in this scenario, the X would be a handler and a dog. This scenario will take a helper for both dogs. So you'll need a second helper. And this scenario does involve leashes, right? The dog is on the leash with the helper. So you have 2 helpers, and you can see on the screen they're offset, right? So I don't start with just across from each other. I have one a little bit in front of and one a little bit behind. And I have them walk to where they're coming together. And then ultimately, they should end up parallel from each other. And this is a fantastic slide, thanks to happynaturaldog.com. But as far as the 10 to 20 feet, it's going to be different for everybody. It may need to be more for some. It could be less for others. What you're looking for, right, is when you're moving through this is that your dogs are comfortable, right? That leash is loose, that we have relaxed, calm body language or wiggly, happy body language. So no closed mouth, no hard stares, no furrowed brow. The dogs are able to look at the other dog, but disengage and show interest on the ground, what's next to them. And sniffing is a great way to help make a positive connection to that dog across from them, right? We can also be doing some training and or treats while we're walking across from each other. But we want that calm dog walking side by side. And again, I like to do this a couple times. And then as my dogs are getting more familiar with it, now that they're parallel, so if they're walking together and they're parallel, we'll slowly start to close that distance. Ultimately, we want our walk to end up somewhere near or around our home if it will work, and then we can go into the home together. We'll talk about what we are going to strategize in the home to make sure things continue to go well. That may not always work out depending on where you live. We may be looking at a car. Do we need to? Is a car too small? Or do we need to do multiple parallel walks and some other get to know yous before we do a car, right? This is where all our plans start to kind of mix and match a bit. So we need to think about things. But when we do our parallel walking, we have our two helpers. We want the dogs on the leash. We want a neutral walking area, right? So oftentimes I have people meet in neighborhoods or areas where they don't walk their resident dog regularly. We start offset, we come together until we're walking parallel, and then we're slowly closing that distance, making sure, of course, as we close that distance, that our dogs continue to show that positive body language we want until eventually they're close enough they can start to sniff and smell and interact briefly. Okay, now we talked about positive association, allowing them to look, allowing them to sniff, offering treats. I do a lot of sniff and treats when the dogs aren't close together, right, to help make that positive association. And making sure they're comfortable looking at that body language when we're doing this. But ultimately, I do want them to say hello. And it might be, again, your parallel walks. You may do multiple over the course of a day or several days or a week. It may take a while before you're right next to each other. Go at your dog's pace. Let them tell you when they're ready for the next step. Now, if we don't have an opportunity for walking, then I like to find a different area outside the home, ideally neutral. It could be a park, it could be a parking lot, it could be the neighbor's backyard if they don't have dogs. And I will do a circle of walking, right? I like circles for a couple different reasons. I can have a smaller neutral space and still try to create a lot of distance. I also, because you'll see in the first circle, which is larger, we can see in the second circle too, but the dogs end up walking in the path that the other dog has gone. So this gives them an opportunity to exchange scents as they're doing the walk, right? So we're not only going to continue to work on positive associations where they can see each other, ideally in the circle, but they can smell the other dog, they can check out where they've urinated or defecated, and that can be very helpful. And of course, over time, we want the distance of our circle to close until our dogs are circling around each other, checking each other out and sniffing. And again, this may take several days or several times out before we have closed that circle. Take it slow. Let your dogs decide when they're ready to move forward. Again, we're looking for that neutral area, making sure we have enough distance, hopefully, that our dogs can be calm and relaxed and work on making that positive association. Now you can get creative here, right? I don't always have people, again, who have outdoor areas. Sometimes we'll do a half circle and I have the generally resident dog, but a dog maybe behind a barrier, like on a porch front porch or a back porch, or in a garage if I have a gate set up, right? And I can have a semicircle where the other dog is walking and kind of slowly bring them closer. That might be an option. Maybe I do a circle around the house. Maybe I have a circle around trees or around cars if it's smaller. So I have some visual blockage to help me out, right? So you can think through these and what's going to work best for the dogs. On the same token, sometimes my visuals cause frustration. So you have to think about the dog and what they're comfortable with. And you may have to play around and start with one part with what you've decided with your building blocks, and you may modify it a bit too as you go. Be open to it. Let your dogs tell you what they're ready for and what they're comfortable with. Now, we can do inside the home greetings. These are not my favorite, but we have those situations where we don't have an option for the outside, whether it's the environment or the weather, maybe it's the dog themselves, and they're more stressed outside the home given their history. So there's a lot of different ways you can consider this. When I do or coach people on an inside the home greeting, one of the things I definitely recommend, and it's top of my list, is that 2-week decompression. Okay. I want the dogs, they're in a new place and the resident dog's in the same place. And I really need to make sure both my dogs can decompress a bit, because the resident dog's going to know there's another dog there. They're going to smell them. So management is a huge part of inside the home. And what I normally have are three spaces or locations when I'm setting this up for success. So I've got to have my new dog separate from my resident dog. Both of them need a safe place. It needs to be separate where they can't see each other. This could be crates on the opposite side of a wall, potentially crates at other ends covered. I generally will still put up an X pin if that's the case, but I really like walls. If we can do that, you can manipulate furniture sometimes to help with that, because we also want a common area that they're not going to share right away, but that both dogs can come out individually while the other one is up and spend time there, playing, training, having a positive connection, building that bond with their new owner, and swapping the smells of the other dog, which is huge. Okay. So keep that in mind. We want to try to set it up where we have 3 spaces. We can get creative about the spaces. We need to think about the dogs. Now, once we've had our 2 weeks separately, and hopefully our dogs are adjusting to, we've maintained a routine with our resident dog to keep them comfortable and less stressed. And we have introduced and gotten our new dog more familiar with it, because that will also help, right? And then we can start an actual introduction process in the home. So when we do that introduction, I have lots of boundaries or barriers put up with gates, X pins, and I'm trying to figure out the furthest distance from the other dog. Then I can have them in the home. On that distance, again, thinking about what's in your home. Do you have one person? Do you have 2 people, right? Maybe it's feasible. I have one of the dogs behind the barrier and one on a leash that I'm working with. Maybe it's the opposite, and I can slowly work to close that distance, working on, again, that positive association, making sure I've got that relaxed and calm body language. Okay. It's a longer process, I think, inside the home, generally, if I want to ensure that my dogs are going to start off on the right positive foot. We also have introductions that we can do off leash. And when I say off leash, leashes are generally attached, but they're dragging them. Okay, so the dogs are freer, and potentially you could even have one off leash. But the idea behind this is to give the dogs more freedom of movement, no restriction of the leash, so we don't have to worry about any complications that might come with them being attached to the leash, not being able to move to convey how they're feeling or what they're thinking with the other dog. And that can be very helpful. It's one of the ways, some of you guys may already be doing this. People are doing introductions and rescue environments to set up play groups for dogs, which is shown to be very successful, right? Is a terrific form of enrichment for dogs in that world. When I am doing off-leash scenarios with the dogs, I generally have, well, let's start with body language first, right? If you're going to use this scenario, I want to be able to read body language well, because I need to intervene. I need to be ready to and know to be ready to intervene, because my dogs may not be, because I'm giving them more freedom, right? And I'm also in this area going to start with a secure, so fully fenced area will be required for this one. And you definitely want a neutral area for this one when feasible. High recommendation. And then I want to think about the space, right? Again, I need to make sure I've got adequate space based on the size of the dogs, maybe based on the energy level or how the dogs play, what I may know about them. That can be very impactful. Now, back to my leashes. I will often start with a long leash, generally on the newer dog that I'm going to introduce to the resident dog. And I will generally have the resident dog in the secure area loose. Depending on that dog, I may or may not have them dragging a leash. We will use parallel walking and or a semicircle or a circular way to slowly approach the resident dog on the long leash, working to make that positive connection until I can have that dog near the resident dog and they can kind of do some greeting and sniffing through the barrier or fence. And then I will come into that area with the new dog, at which point I drop a leash and I give that dog freedom to move, right? Freedom to interact. This is where reading that body language and knowing before there's a problem is going to be huge. So I really want to make sure I'm up to speed on that. But we moderate as needed, and we can use those leashes and we can have them dragging leashes to move away, help them move away if we need to. So lots of options with introductions, lots of ways to tweak those, right? So they work best for the dogs that you're trying to greet and for the family unit or whatever your ultimate goals are. You have to get creative. I find that most people end up using a combination of these, a combination of ideas to get ready, to set their foundation. I encourage people to have helpers. If it is just you, I encourage people to reach out to family, to friends, to find a local dog walker who might be willing to come help. Look at Rover, explore sniff spots for secure areas potentially, or neutral areas. Find out if someone from the shelter, if you've rescued the dog, might be interested in coming to help you. Or if you've gotten a puppy, would the breeder be interested in coming to help you? All great ways to get a second helper. Again, just exploring options that we might have. We also want to consider the age and the size of our dogs. I've mentioned the size of dogs with space, she'll set up, but we also can have 100, as you see in the picture, right? 140-pound dogs to 15 or 20-pound dogs. And so that may change when we're watching that body language, how much freedom we give our dogs to communicate. We might step in a bit sooner because there may be a greater risk if there is a miscommunication in somebody getting injured, right? So again, things to think about. While normally we want to try to be hands-off and not pressure our dogs, not be too close, let them communicate, these may be different scenarios. We also have to think about behavioral risk. If I have an 8-week-old puppy, 10-week-old puppy, hopefully I've given them a couple weeks to decompress, and I'm introducing them to an older dog. If my older dog reprimands them or is too harsh, which could happen because puppies aren't good at understanding yet what they should do or when they should back off or what that communication is, my older dog could actually influence and damage my puppy long term, right? They're in a window of socialization if they have a negative experience with an adult dog, even though it's your resident dog. So again, all the more reason in those scenarios to take things even slower. Really work on those building blocks and make sure you have everything in place before you're starting that introduction. If you have a dog with a known negative history with other dogs, that's also going to influence our plan, right? Our greetings may get even more creative. But in those scenarios, we are almost always going to want to build a very thorough desensitization and counter conditioning plan, right? And I would encourage you to work with a professional trainer on that, but we will want to build those. Ultimately, we need to have patience and just take time. Give our dogs the time they need to just get to know the other dog. I mean, if we think about ourselves getting to know people, how many times does it take for you to be around someone before you start to be more of yourself, right? Before you're more comfortable being more of yourself or asking questions that are more of a get to know you. Take that time. Think about the scenario that's going to work best for your dogs. Now, presuming we've done everything best we can with our building blocks, we have strategically planned a really great intro, and it hopefully has gone very well, right? We still want to talk about how do we keep the peace? How do we continue into the house once our dogs have met and greeted and are doing well? How do we continue to promote that once we go inside? We also want to just kind of briefly talk about too, if an intro is going poorly, what other help might we want to have? Or if we are concerned our intro could go poorly, no matter how well we've planned it out, what other backup support do we want? And then what do we do when that intro goes wrong, right? So when we talk about keeping the peace, right? Making sure we continue to build on that positive relationship that we've worked so hard to start off on the right foot with our introduction. We want to make sure that once we've gotten our dogs into the home, and we may, as I said, you might still have 3 spaces for dogs. We might have a common area for dogs, or we might just make sure they both have their own space, right? Or any resident dog, but every dog should have their own space. This may be crates, this may be rooms, this may be beds, but this can be very helpful in establishing structure in the home. Every dog knows the expectation, and that decreases worry and concern. Same for mealtime. I highly recommend dogs are fed separately. Somewhere along the way, many of us have kind of gotten it in our head, our dogs should just be able to eat together. I would find it very hard to sit down and eat with a complete stranger and be comfortable. And I want my dogs to be comfortable. So let's just feed them separately. And we can do that in their space or a separate area and establish that as part of our routines right away. Consider the same for our novelties. So these are our toys. And for some dogs, this may be their bed. So we have to think about that as well. But introducing those slowly. So when we have dogs coming into that common area of the home where they're going to be, we do want to try to have things picked up, toys, beds, certainly if they get concerned about beds, but special blankets, any chew bones. And don't forget that toy that's been sitting on the floor in the same corner for 3 years your dog has never looked at, it needs to come up too. You would be amazed at what changes in value when suddenly there's another dog in the area, okay? Instead, those can come back out after we've had a couple weeks of working on our relationship, right? So that's interacting, continuing to go on walks, setting up the structure and the routine, starting some training and getting to know them, and then we can bring those out. This also means our common area, we want our dogs supervised. Okay, we don't want to leave these dogs unsupervised. We don't know them well. Many trainers are actually recommending months, if not longer, depending on the dog, as far as making sure our dogs are comfortable with each other before we leave them unsupervised. One of the things we can start to do when we're looking at routines and structure is creating playtime breaks. So as our dogs are getting more comfortable and we might see play with some of our dogs, make that a part of the norm to just take a break, go out, take a walk together. You could have a break where you just call them over and sit and they get some praise. If you're not concerned about food, we could do a treat to the mouth one and a treat to the other, okay? But that helps our dogs learn how to auto-regulate their excitement and their adrenaline when they're playing, and that will allow them to remain at a level that we want them communicating at and not a level that we don't, where we end up with miscommunication. And this is also a really good time to start to establish the patterns in the homes. As much as we talk about routine and structure, the actual pattern of how things go. For example, at dinner time, resident dog goes to their crate, is cued, gets a treat. Other dog goes to their crate, cued, gets a treat or not. As far as treats, it's up to you and what the dogs know. Then we prepare the meals, and then the first meal delivered is to the resident dog, and the second meal delivered is to my new dog. It doesn't, sometimes we use certain orders, but in general, it's just about establishing that pattern, that order. How do we exit the home? What does that look like? How do we get in the car to go places? That can be very helpful for keeping my dogs comfortable, knowing what's happening, and then not having to be concerned or worried. Now, during an actual introduction, let's just talk about some other things we can use if we need a backup plan, right? And I love this picture because body language is a big part of whether or not we need to do more or use a backup plan, right? I would dare say that the dog on the right is happy. Her mouth is open, big feet grin, tongue hanging out, soft brow, but her ears are back, and does have an averted gaze. Maybe she's having a good time, but she doesn't really like this dog right beside her, checking out her face, right? So it's important that we can recognize and look at this so that then we know what should we be doing and what tools or equipment do we have in place to help us in this scenario. We've already talked about several things as far as tools and using that, having those harnesses that may have a part on the back so I can grab it if I need to. Again, want to try and give my dogs the freedom to communicate. Leashes, dragging if I need those. But hopefully, instead, if I'm watching my body language and I'm paying attention, I can just use some very simple, mild interrupter tools, as simple as a novel sound like a kissy sound, or a whistle, or maybe a clap. Maybe I just shuffle my feet, things to kind of get the dog sidetracked a bit to look at you, take down my stress, and then we can go back to getting to know each other. Okay. Now, in certain situations, you may want to have worst case scenario backup tools, the pet corrector spray or spray bottles. Hopefully, we don't have to do any of that because we've set ourselves up for success with the building blocks and how we've established our intro. But I know in certain settings, some people just like to have those as a backup. I just want to caution you that regardless of what you use for an interrupter tool, any dog, depending on the dog, they could see it as aversive, right? It could even a clap could be aversive. And if they do, they could see that becomes negative, and that could be connected to the introduction, to the interaction, to you. So just keep that in mind. But hopefully, again, we can use very mild ones that just allow us to stay in front of any problems. We can also have visual barriers that we should think about having. This could be as simple as like a trash can lid or different dog houses that you could move behind. Maybe you have a towel or a blanket that you keep with you. Again, things to kind of block that visual, depending on where you're at and what you can do, going behind a tree just to kind of break that prolonged stare if we have any, right? If we're trying to move those dogs away. And this is the backup. This is if things are not going the way we want to. Maybe we need to be in an area where there's a secondary pen, or we need to bring a secondary X pen or area that allows us to move a dog out of it. Something to keep in mind. Maybe we need a dog gate with us to help easily move dogs away if we need to. Maybe we need to be providing more breaks than we thought we would. Maybe it's not one where we're going to give them more freedom for communicate. Maybe it's constant breaks and interruptions. Maybe we just aren't sure and we need to do a consent test, right? We need to have the dog that seems to be more energetic and more engaged and maybe a little bit more elevated as far as where they're feeling with us. And we need to give the secondary dog an option to either come over and continue the engagement or walk away if they want. Okay. Because if they walk away, that becomes a very clear signal they were kind of done. Good call on our part, right? And if they want to continue to engage, then they're consenting with it. So all good to kind of have in your pocket for backup plans if we are concerned or maybe have a history where intros haven't gone well with this dog and we just want to, in addition to everything else, be super cautious. And then of course, our really worst case scenario is when things don't go well, right? And we do have an altercation. The greeting has not gone how we wanted it to. In this situation, first and foremost, we need to get both dogs safe, right? We need to separate and get everybody safe. And then we're going to talk about a reset. This is going to be a break, a 2-week break, no interactions, no seeing each other. We need to start over. And if I want to have an opportunity to do that successfully, then I need to make sure all my cortisol is out of my system, my dogs are calm, and I want to ensure I don't have any other negative associations being made. So 2 weeks for a reset is my recommendation. This means I'm going to need a lot of management to make sure my dogs can't see each other. We go back to how are we going to set up the house? How are we going to rotate our dogs successfully so they're not in each other's paths? We want everybody to be safe and calm down. So we've got to start looking in the environment. What resources do we need to remove? What training do we want to put in place? It's a good time during these 2 weeks to reevaluate. What does the dog want? Does my new dog feel safe? Did they feel safe? Does my resident dog feel safe? How severe was this altercation? Does my family want this? Is this a good fit for everybody, right? It's a time to look at everything and think through the scenario. Are we ready to make that commitment to get back in it and try it again? And we think we can do this. So then we've got to restart, and we've got to restart after those 2 weeks with some changes. We've got to look at our plan. Can we identify anywhere we might have missed things, and maybe this is potentially where it started to go poorly? What should we change there? Or if we can't identify it, do we need a completely different plan? Do we need to approach this a different way, a different style of intro? Do we need to take more time? All things to think about. And then ultimately, we are going to need to build a desensitization and a counter conditioning plan. So this is going to be a stepwise process of slowly exposing our dogs, generally at distances, but it's steps where we can counter or change. So that's my counter conditioning, how they feel about the dog that they had a bad introduction with. This is when we want to get a professional trainer involved to help you build this plan. Even if they don't do it all with you, help you build it so you know how to move through it, because it's going to take some time and it's going to be a process. And it can be done. But hopefully, we did everything right from the get-go. We built a solid foundation. We prepared everything appropriately. We took into account our resources. We strategically planned our intro, and we set everybody up for success. And we now have 2 very good friends as dogs, or at least dogs that can live in the same house, the same environment, happily, contentedly, right? And so that's where we want to go with navigating our introductions. I hope you guys have enjoyed this webinar. I hope it's giving you ideas on how to do introductions and really all the various possibilities that are out there. I do want to also let you guys know that next month we are going to be doing a webinar on introduction to cats. And then we intend to hopefully follow that up in January and February with kids and then with babies. So lots of great ways to be proactive in our post-adoptions. So thank you, everybody. And hopefully Lisa is on screen and can help me with question and answer in chats, because
I sure am here. Thank you, Kate. And you are ahead of schedule. The wonders will never cease. There was not a ton of questions. I will say again, just quickly to everybody, this will be recorded and will be sent out next week prior to Thanksgiving. So stay tuned for that. There is a long question, Kate, that I'd rather not read out loud in the Q&A. If you want to start reading that, and then you can talk about it while I quickly remind everyone that if you are interested in partnering with Good Pup, you can do so through our affiliate program, our scholarship program, or through these webinar series. We have some really cool things coming 2024. So if you are interested in either newly participating or more in-depth participation in 2024, please email shelters@goodpup.com and your account manager will be getting back to you. Hopefully I gave you enough time, Kate. Other than the questions right now open in the Q&A channel, there were not any additional questions.
Great. My chat disappeared, so I couldn't see it. Man, Wendy, you're doing an amazing job. Kudos to you. So I'm going to address your second question first. I think I would be reluctant to do that with this dog's history. As far as one loose and one crated, I would be more inclined, and that really comes down to space. I think I would be more inclined to do outside. And if you could do kind of like I was saying, if you had a porch or a deck and you could do a circle, because that would give you somewhere to go from the parallel walks to kind of a semicircle to an outside area. And then in that area, potentially have the dog that's on the porch or the deck loose. I think that would, the more freedom of movement and the more space would be much more helpful for that. And then of course, as we discussed, right, you're going to do one dog at a time moving forward, but you're already doing an amazing job. That would be me. That would be where I would start and see how that goes with the first dog and then reassess and see if we need to do it again. So, and then I think we've had a couple more come in. So I'll go.
Yes, there have been. And that case, for those that didn't know, sometimes people submit questions via a Q&A where you're not going to be able to see. That one was a very specific question that Kate was answering. But we'll read the question out loud before answering, because I don't think people in chat can see the Q&A.
Okay, that one was very long. Sorry, everybody. Essentially, in short, Wendy is doing a terrific job with a dog that has had was not happy in the shelter with other dogs, they think due to stress, and she has a house with 7 dogs and is trying to potentially introduce this dog there. And she's done a lot of parallel walks and blocking the visuals and decompression. She's doing everything right. So I was addressing kind of where she might go with her next step as far as getting that dog to dog connection with the first resident dog. Okay, Mel asked, any advice, resources on how to share all of this good information during relatively short adoption visits? I'm so glad you asked, Mel. I'm excited to say, I can't promise this, but we are working on a handout that would go along with this webinar that would potentially then be made available with the webinar. So stay tuned, but we are hoping to be able to provide that for you guys. So, okay. And then Jen said, can you say again what DSCC means and what is it? Yes, Jen. Sorry, I should have actually put that in there. That's me on my shorthand. I apologize, everybody. DSCC is desensitization and counter conditioning. So desensitization is the stepwise process of slowly moving towards an end goal. Steps meaning at each step, we are making sure we have our dog, cat, whatever we're working with, content, comfortable, calm. Counter conditioning is to go backwards. So think like a clock. I want to counter or change, go backwards on what the feeling is. So if I have a dog that has a negative association with the dog, I want to counter that. I want to change it. So I'm going to use this stepwise process. For example, parallel walking is really desensitization, stepwise process. We start at a distance and we're slowly using steps to close that distance. And at each step, we're making sure we have this happy, contented dog. If I was counter conditioning, I'd be making sure to change that scenario, how that dog feels, by making sure I have food, right? To counter it, something positive, and then we continue forward. So hopefully that answered your question. Thank you. And thank you for reminding me that I need to be on top of my, I need to make sure I explain that in the webinar. So apologies.
Before we jump to Fina's question, I know Karina had a question that I think is similar to what we just asked. I want to just make sure we don't miss it, Kate, because it was kind of buried. Which is a lot of these ideas involve the luxury of time. And at a rescue with sometimes people who come in from out of state, the luxury of time does not always exist. What then? I do think having a handout or something quick that we can give people to discuss this stuff is part of that. Anything else for Karina?
I mean, a handout would be great. And I know short on time, and that's why we want to make the handout, right? Because I know how short you guys are on time, and I know how overpacked everybody is, and it's really trying to give all of these dogs an opportunity at a home, right? If in I would say, I assume most people do some kind of an adoption form. People fill out information about their home, right? I would say if nothing else, if you have that history in mind, maybe you could quickly say, oh, you have other dogs and cats. Well, we've seen this here. I would recommend trying parallel leash walking. In short, you want to start at a distance and slowly close it as the dogs are comfortable. Essentially, if you could look at that and assess a quick way to recommend how they make that introduction. I'm guessing they come in, take the dog, and take the dog home, right? You could also recommend just the 2 weeks of separation management, and then in that interim, they could contact you guys back and build a plan as far as time. Maybe something that would work. If you do any follow-up, that's another idea as well. But that's a great question, and that's hard. It's hard. I guess if nothing else, distance is key to make sure we have dogs. And you may have very social dogs who in 20 minutes are fine and doing great. We've all seen that too. So it's not that every dog requires this. It's just that we're discovering if we went about this a little slower and a little more strategically, we decrease the risk of not having that positive relationship in a multi-dog home.
Perfect. And thank you, Karina. If you have any questions, other questions, Karina, you can ping us at shelters@goodpup.com, and I'll loop Kate in as needed for questions
Absolutely.
around behavior. So feel free to reach out. All right, back to Fina Garcia. You see this question, Kate?
I do. I'm trying to read it and debating how much I should read out to everybody.
I do think sometimes people can see it. If you do click the Q&A question at the bottom, you can read it. So I wouldn't worry too much. I think I was confused about that. I would.
Okay. Yes. So in this question, so you think everybody can see this?
I think so, yes.
So I guess what I would say in this question, because it sounds like you did an in-house introduction, which did not work well. So we reevaluate, we reassess, and I would say, let's try an outside the house introduction and then walk into the home. And I suspect, while it could still not be perfect, I bet it will go better. So I would start exploring. I wouldn't necessarily take fostering off the docket yet, but I would explore other locations, neutral areas, and try this again and try it with one of your dogs first and see how it goes. The circle, the parallel leash walking, see what you think is going to work best, but try it outside the home first. So great question, Pina. And then Darcy. Yes, Darcy, I would love to have a video. It's a idea we have discussed, and if we can get you one, we will get you one. How about that? But I do not have one. I didn't have one. I didn't have dogs I could make one with. But yes, I think that would be great. I would love to have video too. And if we can get that, we'll give you guys access. And then Al has a puppy pen. Yes, Al, this does sound like a good setup, right? Because it's neutral to your resident dogs because they're not allowed out there. Yeah, I think that's great. It's working, it's going well. I wouldn't do anything different. If something didn't go well, I think you could probably assess the situation and potentially chalk it up to the individual dog more than anything. But that's fantastic. it's terrific that you've got that set up.
Follow up from Fina.
Fina was the one with dogs in the home, right? Sorry, you're kind of deleting the questions. So I'm just
Yeah, have you
making
ever
sure.
counted your 2 resident dogs? Yes, that one.
Right. So I guess, Fina, I interpreted your question as in the dogs had not met already. I see what you're saying as far as community decompression. If there's no way to have them in the home where it's going to be stress-free, then you may want to consider trying that outside introduction and seeing how it goes, and then having them come into the home and maintaining kind of that indoor management where your resident dogs have a location and your other dog has a location, but they may have already previously met. And maybe it's not a huge meeting, right? Maybe it's not play and everybody's all over the place. Maybe it's just some short sniffs and everybody walks in together would be, I think, key. And then we have one dog in their space and one dog in the others, and then maybe you could rotate them. You'd have to play around and see. And yes, it's a great question, because not everything's going to be according to the book, right? And your dogs may be more stressed at the thought of another dog in the home. They may become more sensitive, and then this may elevate them. So it may not be an option to do the separation in home. Maybe the separation was not being able to see each other. Maybe we need to do an outside introduction a couple times, have them get to know the dog a couple times, and then have the dog come in and they can actually see each other. And there's a visual barrier. Maybe that will be helpful. So another option you could go with. And when I say the intros a couple times, because I know you're fostering, I'm thinking multiple intros over the course of a day to see how it goes, to see if you can at least have them come in the home. So hopefully that, again, gives you some more ideas as far as where to go. Those are great questions.
All right, couple more that were in and kind of don't want it to be missed. Kristen asked, can you talk about specific body language that dogs show when they are accepting or not accepting the other dog, tail up or down? I know that can be confusing. You can answer that here. I also want to quickly say on our webinar series, we have 2 amazing webinars on body language. So it's going to go into this in a lot more detail. So let me send that link in chat. Kate, you can certainly address it here, but I'm sure we have 2 hours worth of body language material. So I want you to check that out if you can.
Yeah,
So
tons of stuff on that. What I will say about the tail is that a tail over the back, even if loose, is arousal and adrenaline, right? So those are the dogs that, while I may let them continue, I'm watching very closely, because arousal is when my scales can quickly tip the other direction. What ideally I want is a tail level with the back that's loose, not over the back. Now, of course, you have to look at the individual dog and their tail carriage. Some dogs naturally carry their tails over their back. But that, in short answer to that question, and then check out the body language webinar. It talks about all those subtle body language cues that you would be looking for. And you've got to look at the whole dog, not just one signal, everything to tell. So
you'll
hopefully
never
that
look at
answered
a dog the same after watching those body language videos, let me tell you.
And then I think the last question I see is suggestions on introducing foster dogs with young children, cats. Is there a better order? I don't know that there's a better order, Judy. What I would say is I think it's much more challenging to manage my children in a room. And so it might be easier to do them first. And a cat I could more easily manage, so it might be easier to do them second. That would be my only suggestion there. And we will be talking about those in our upcoming webinars.
Yes, for more on young children, babies, cats, etc., please visit us. Oh, here's another one. And then we're gonna have to close it off. What if a dog is dog reactive and supposedly doesn't get along with other dogs? Is there hope there?
If that was like the first walk together, then honestly, Darcy, it was probably just too fast.
This is from Karina.
Oh, sorry. I'm reading Darcy's and you're reading Karina's. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
It's just what my screen's showing. Tell me what Karina said again.
Karina said, what if there's a dog who is dog reactive? What if a dog is dog reactive, supposedly doesn't get along with other dogs? Is there hope there?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, yes.
The social circle will be much smaller. I would not put hopes in a big multi-dog household. And I'm not saying every dog that there's a yes. But in the right situation, yes, you could do a desensation and counter conditioning to a dog, depending on how you set it up. It's just a much, much slower process because the risk is higher. And then Darcy had a question about her resident dog in the backyard. And that was the one I was about to say. I suspect that that was just too fast and we probably missed subtle signs on the walk, which is what happens. We have seen in the last week at Good Pup 3 different altercations in homes of dogs adopted that met dogs and were fine. And 3 days later, we have an altercation because we don't have a decompression period and we probably didn't catch things on that introduction. And then all of a sudden the dogs are calming down and we see other signals come out. So not uncommon at all. It's just taking that time to slow things down a bit more and really watching that body language.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kate. And thank you everyone for coming and for all the questions and feedback. Please check out our webinar series. If you don't save the links from the chat, just go to goodpup.com and you can find them from there, or always email us at shelters@goodpup.com and we can help you. Thank you, everyone,
All right.
and have
Thanks,
a
everybody.
wonderful holiday.